We're joined now by former Defence Minister Tobias Ellwood. Tobias, good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you.
Now, look, we seem to have wasted billions of pounds, billions of taxpayers' money for the last few years. How is this cash injection going to be any different?
Well, we do need to spend money more wisely. We need to recognise the changing spectrum of threats that we face. I've called for a stock check, if you like, on what is coming over the horizon. And that is the key message that I think the Prime Minister is trying to articulate. A change in mindset of the fact, recognising that the threat picture is deteriorating. Our world is certainly more contested than any time since 1945. Europe is at war once again. State on state is back. State on state aggression is back. And the UK is involved, whether we like it or not, in supporting Ukraine, who's doing the fighting for us. So part of this extra funds will go to support Ukraine, because there'll be huge consequences, of course, if Russia wins, but also then to upgrade our supplies, our stocks of munitions and so forth. And as you implied, we do need to be better than that, looking at our supply chains, access to markets, and making sure we procure the equipment that is required for the wars of the future, not perhaps the conventional challenges of the past.
So all of those managers, all those civil servants who have been wasting our cash, buying missiles that can't fire, aircraft carriers that are stuck in ports, are we going to go in and fire them? Why would we give them this money and have the responsibility with them when they've proven they cannot spend this money effectively?
So if I may, you're being a little bit flippant. I mean, procuring a aircraft carrier is a very difficult thing, and you don't make a prototype and then build the real thing. The prototype is your final product, and if there's problems with the propulsion systems, we need to fix them. They go back to the port, and that's what's done. That's one of the reasons why we have 2 aircraft carriers. And as for the missiles not working, our missiles do work. In the particular case I think you're referring to, which is a test of a ballistic missile, there was some registering equipment that was attached to the missile, which actually impeded its ability to function correctly. So let's not be too dismissive simply because occasionally equipment doesn't work to plan. We have the most professional armed force in the world. We have some of the most competent bits of and complex bits of military equipment as well. We simply don't have enough of them, but I will concede that money has been wasted. Ajax is perhaps the best example of where the specification has changed in the middle of designing this thing. That's actually increased the cost of it and the delays before it's actually put onto the front line itself. So we've got more money. We need to make sure that we do spend it wisely. So I hear what you're saying.
But Tobias, the Defence Committee has repeatedly questioned the Ministry of Defence when it comes to procurement. It's been woeful. I do not understand how we can say, here's billions more pounds, and we're going to let the same people who've handled it for the past few years continue to handle it going forward.
Well, give me an example. I'm happy to talk through with you, but I think you're wanting to have an argument. Let's look at the bigger picture. Our world is getting more dangerous, not less. We do need to move our industry to a war footing. That does require our industry to get better at what they do. There's no doubt about that. But if I may, let's elevate this debate as to what we need to do. We are now stepping forward and spending more. As was mentioned in your introduction, we need to see our allies doing that as well. Germany, that's been very hesitant, understandably, since the end of the last war on spending anything on defense, is now recognizing that their economy is affected if the security situation increases to gets worse. The Red Sea is a great example of that, of the Houthi attacks there. If British warships and others don't protect our international sea lanes, then our economy here in the UK is affected. If those grain ships don't get out of Odessa, food prices go up here in the UK. There's a symbiotic relationship between our economy and our security. Absolutely right. We need to spend that money more wisely. And certainly that is a challenge for the MOD and others to make sure that we develop and procure the necessary equipment for the threats that are now ahead of us, rather than those ones that we've had in the past.
Tobias, forgive me, I'm not trying to pick a fight with you, I'm really not. But for an example of waste, for example, the huge sums that we've paid to companies like Capita, who have messed up army recruitment. We can't recruit for the army, we can't recruit for the navy. These are areas where money has been wasted. And someone along the way has signed that off and said, this is where the money is going to be spent. So all I want to know is, are those people who've made the poor decisions previously going to be trusted going forward with these billions of pounds?
So you're now moving into a different area, which is not to do with equipment and so forth and munitions, but to do with recruitment, accommodation, and so forth. And yes, there have been problems. I dealt with part of this when I was defense minister. And if you want to attract good people to step into the shoes and wear the uniform, yeah, you absolutely need to make sure that the accommodation is up to par, is what the younger generation now expect as they leave homes. You expect to have single accommodation, with internet access and so forth. That's not always been the case. Money is being invested. And on the recruitment package, yes, we've not met the targets as we should have done. And if that's the case, if those standards aren't met, then that contract should be handed over or indeed taken perhaps in-house to the military themselves. That's what's happened in the past.
OK, and where do we think this money is going to come from? Surely Sunak would have to take money from somewhere else in government to push it across to defence.
Yeah, it's a good question. We had a statement from the Defence Secretary today to say, and there's also the Chancellor, don't forget, was travelling with the Prime Minister when these initial announcements were made. I start off by saying the consequences of us not upping our defence posture, because as I keep stressing again and again, our world is getting more dangerous. Our economy is very much exposed to the global markets. If there's any interruption of those markets, as we saw with COVID, but anything deliberate, then it'll affect our economy. So it's in our interest now to not only make sure that we defend what's important to us, also make sure Ukraine wins and defeats Russia. Otherwise, Russia will not stop there. But we're going to see a reduction in the number of civil servants, I think, across the board as well. It became a bit bloated during and after COVID. That'll be one aspect of it. But yes, there's some difficult decisions about where the spending will come from, which will the Treasury will roll out in the next coming months.
Well, Tobias, I'm also joined by our TalkTV international editor, Isabel Oakeshott here. Isabel, we've heard Tobias speaking there about how the money could be spent. My big gripe is that I do feel it would be irresponsible to let the same people who've wasted our billions then be handed more.
So you raised the example of Capita, which I think is a really powerful one. He said it's not, you're talking about two different things. Well, no, you're not. It's all Ministry of Defence spending. I just checked on Capita, and it's a classic kind of case of what you're saying, because back in 2012, the Army contracted with Capita. It's a 10-year contract to transform recruitment, and not in one single year did Capita actually hit its targets for recruitment. Why was that contract given over a whole decade? If they failed year one, well, maybe there's some excuses. If they failed on year two, well, if you're being generous, give them another chance. Sorry, 10 years of failure? Why do we continually reward the same outsourcing companies with enormous contracts when they're failing? It's just one example.
Yeah.
I spent a long time looking into the state of the armed forces. Tobias is absolutely right on pretty much everything he says. Good for Rishi Sunak to have finally done this. We are in a much more dangerous world. And as an illustration of how things have changed, this year, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has said 18 nations will actually pay the minimum 2% recommended of GDP for defence spending. That's a huge change in recent years. That has gone up from just 11 in 2023 and a six-fold increase from 2014. In 2014, only 3 countries were paying the minimum recommended by really what NATO wants you to spend, to show that you're not just trying to get a free ride out of the Americans and frankly the British and other countries that take this really seriously. So gradually, and in fact recently fairly rapidly, countries are waking up to the obvious fact that we are in a very, very dangerous geopolitical situation.
Absolutely. Tobias, you're still with us. So currently 18 out of 31 members of NATO paying the required percentage. But what does it say about the ones who aren't paying it? And as Donald Trump has suggested, why are we paying in the money to defend countries who are not paying their fair share?
Yes, it's a powerful point, and Isabel's absolutely right. You will find, if you look at the map, the closer you get to Russia, the more increase in defence spending you find, and that's an obvious factor there. Some are already paying more than us, Poland, I think, and the Baltic countries as well.
That's correct.
I think what we're doing here and moving forward is to set the bar high for all of NATO. I hope that's something that's brought up when they meet in Washington in June at the NATO summit. But Isabel also touched on something else. It's the consequence of what Donald Trump might do. He hinted at leaving NATO the last time he was in office. And I can understand, I'm half American, I should declare. I can understand perhaps the frustration from the Americans that we should do more to look after our own security. And that's absolutely right. We should do. There is a danger, though, that if America retreats completely, changes its defense posture in Europe totally, and the consequence of that is for Russia to advance its interests in the grey zone, or indeed directly, as it's done in Ukraine, there will be an impact on the American economy, on the global economy, but American economy as well. So there's some big questions there for us to be able to work together. But absolutely, the message must be very, very clear. All of NATO should be now moving to 2.5%. And
Tobias, just one more question for you. Penny Mordaunt has suggested we have some kind of Iron Dome built for the UK. Is it likely any of this money is going to go towards that?
So it is a good question. The threat isn't there at the moment. The Army offers something called Sky Sabre, which provides air defense capability. The Navy has got the Type 45s. They're in operation in the Red Sea. They do an incredible job with their Sea Viper system. And in RAF Lossiemouth and Coningsby, we have the Rapid Reaction Forces there. These are Typhoons that within minutes can be airborne and do what they did, as they did taking out Iranian drones and missiles. So our skies, we're pretty much protected. But yes, as we move forward, we probably will need to think of a more protective anti-missile system, umbrella of some form, for the United Kingdom, as I'm afraid, the threat picture continues to deteriorate.
OK, Tobias Ellwood, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.